Hey guys, Tim Briggs here with Collision Edge. So today I thought we'd talk just a minute about primer because I watch his social media posts all the time. And, guys, I don't have it all figured out. I failed a lot of ways, and I don't want you guys to fail the same way I have. But I watch a lot of his social media posts about primer, and I think there's a big misconception in how primer works. And I'm not a chemist. I know some chemists. I've talked to a lot of chemists, and I just thought today we'd talk about a little bit about primers and kind of what they are and understand, what they do and how they work. So the first thing we need to talk about really is composition. So the very first issue that we always look at is 1K versus 2K. 1K is a primer that, will never harden. You put it in the aerosol, you spray it, you put it in the gun, you spray it, it'll sit there forever, right? A 2K primer is a primer that has a catalyst. So that catalyst is going to drive a reaction, kind of like cooking an egg. So when you start with an egg, it's an egg, and when you cook it, it's a different thing. So that's the way 1K versus 2K is. 2K primers are a lot more robust, will hold up better over time. They're built for specific needs. Now, there are 1K primers that are still necessary inside our business, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And we'll talk about some differences between urethanes and epoxies and lacquers and all that kind of stuff. Also, those aerosol cans that say etch primer, so be aware of those. So anyway, 1K versus 2K is one of the things that we need to consider when we're talking about primer. Now, next thing is how does a primer get its adhesion? It gets its adhesion either by mechanical adhesion, meaning a scratch, or it gets its adhesion by chemical adhesion, right? So all primers are always going to walk the line between needing one or both of those, depending on what they are. And again, I'm not a chemist, but just understand that there's different types of adhesion, chemical versus mechanical. And maybe we'll kind of talk about those as we go through these different types of primers so you'll understand it. So we got rid of that. Now, let's talk about etch primer. So everybody knows etch primer is that little rattle can you spray and it etches. Well, okay. Be aware of some etch primers. If it's in an aerosol can, be aware maybe they have etch, maybe they don't. Etch is a very general term. When we speak about etch, we're talking about an acid that is actually going to bite and eat into the metal and help your coating stick. Okay, that's etch. But I guess you could use etch in a lot of ways. It has other properties that kind of etch the metal, but is it really an acid or not? That's a big deal. You got to understand that. I would say that honestly, there's really no place for an aerosol primer in a body shop, period, because there's a lot of other great options. We'll talk about them today. So this is your etch primer. Etch primer is one of those, it's kind of a two-component primer. You're going to add an acid to it, and you got a base that you're putting together. So that's why they call it kind of a two-component. It's not really catalyzed, okay? So etch primer, what I mean by that is etch primer, when you get done with it and it's all dried, it's a really thin green, simply green coating. That can be wiped off with lacquer thinner, so it is soluble. Another interesting word for the day, soluble. So soluble versus insoluble. We talked about 1K and 2K. 1K is something that will never actually harden all the way. It's always soluble, meaning I can take lacquer thinner and wipe it off, or things will attack it over time. 2K, not going to be attacked by solvents, right? So you got to think about that. That's another very interesting point that you guys, if you can just grasp the difference in soluble versus insoluble, you'll solve so many of your own problems in the shop. It's amazing. So etch primer is soluble. It's typically a primer with an acid in it. The primer and the acid together work to make a very thin coating. You can't spray it too thick because again, it's a 1K product. So if you spray it too thick, you're going to end up with issues where your top coat is going to sink down into it. You're going to get wrinkling and lifting if you cut into it. There's all those things. A lot of guys don't use etch primer anymore unless they're doing this huge bare metal area and they're an OEM or whatever. There's a lot of great options related to epoxy. So epoxy is a really, really awesome workhorse. There's several of them on the market. PPG's got one called DP, available in several colors. Typically epoxies get their adhesion both from mechanical and chemical. So understand this, because you don't want to take a bare metal panel and sand it with an old piece of 180 that polishes it, because effectively you don't have a 180 scratch anymore. You have like a 1,000 grit scratch because you're polishing the metal, especially on aluminum, right? So epoxy is a great option for bare metal. A lot of guys use that when they have bare metal. Now I'll tell you this, the nice thing about epoxy is it has a really long pot life. There's another term. The pot life is basically how long after you mix the product it can still be used. I'll tell you, a lot of the epoxies are all day. Okay, so the nice thing about epoxy is you get an old ratty gun, and you can mix up some epoxy in the morning, keep it all day. Any bare metal cut throughs you get, you can hit it with that, and it's going to be a lot better solution than spraying some rattle can. Promise you. So epoxy doesn't have a lot of fill. The one I'm talking about doesn't. Now there are some epoxies that have fill, and those are going to be more down in the filler area that we'll talk about in a minute. So the epoxy is a great option to put down as a first step, first barrier of defense on your bare metal areas. Epoxies dry really slow. They don't sand very well because you're not putting a lot down. Typically, they don't sand very well. That's where you see a non-sanding sealer. That's when we're talking about epoxies. It's you spray this down and basically let it dry, and then come back and put another something on top of it. There's a big misconception that guys say primer is primer, all primer sticks to everything. So you guys need to understand this. That's why we're doing this today. So lacquer primer. A lot of guys have used lacquer primer forever. A lot of your aerosol cans, guess what, are lacquer, okay? They spray out real nice, they dry fast, you can sand them easy. They're kind of complete crap. So if you come back later with a lacquer thinner rag, you can wipe it off. 10 years down the road, after you finish, it sat there for a while. If you ever had a wreck and you end up repairing an area and you spray it, you're going to swell that lacquer. You're going to get that cracking, all those things that you guys always see. So lacquer primer, it's a boo, okay? So stay away from that. Urethane primer. So years back, everybody was using lacquer primer. They came out with urethane. Well, now this is a product that I have to catalyze that gets hard in the cup if I leave it in my gun. Everybody hated it. The good thing about a urethane primer is that when you spray it down, it's going to give you a nice base to work with. It's going to give you decent filling power. It's going to do all the things you want a primer to do. The one thing it won't do, and this is a big misconception, if you've got bare metal, you need to put an epoxy down first, because typically urethane primers, while they have good fill and they're nice and firm, they don't stick well to bare metal. They will stick with mechanical adhesion, but not so much with chemical adhesion. So stay away from taking your primers direct to bare metal as far as a urethane primer goes. Now, there are some options, some urethane primers and some different epoxies and things like that. There are a fill primer that you use to kind of straighten your body work and things of that nature. Okay, so those will stick to bare metal if they have that DTM quality, okay? What I'll tell you and what I would tell you about is understand that what makes that primer stick to bare metal, you don't want to breathe that, okay? Because the dust that you're going to make from that is going to be flying around everywhere, and there's something there called hexachromates, I think is what my chemist buddy told me. Those are really, really bad for you. So when you use a bare metal primer, the goal is we don't really have to sand it. So we put an epoxy down. The epoxy is going to lay there. You're not really going to sand it. You're going to put a urethane on top of it. The urethane is what you're going to sand, and if the urethane has, properties that make it bare metal adhesion, I really wouldn't want to sand it, and if you do sand it, wear a full respirator, okay? So that's the urethanes. So I hope you guys are getting this. Now, the next step, so polyester, it's kind of a filling power thing here, right? So we got no fill, some fill, a lot of fill, and then all the way down to Bondo and glaze, because really, when you're doing body work, you're always trying to get something straight, right? So polyester is really like a spray Bondo. It's a thinner version of like a glaze that you're actually going to spray. So the polyester works nice. There's a lot of great ones out there. Clausen's got one that's really good. We all love Evercoat Slick Sand. Again, though, these primers, and some of them are even built to go to bare metal. If I were you, I would always use an epoxy underneath it. The slick sand and the polyesters sand really nice. They build really well. Don't try to use them as a body filler necessarily. Don't try to fill a dent with them, because they do get brittle when they're laid out in thick areas. So understand that. So that's kind of the polyester piece. And then beyond that is your Bondo and glaze. Now, one of the nice things about the polyester is, let's say that you strip, and I've got one out here I'm going to show you guys. If you strip a hood or a roof that has hail damage on it, in my mind, the first thing you're going to do is strip that and put epoxy on it to get it all nice and locked up. Now, epoxy's non-sanding, so I don't really want to sand epoxy. I don't want to cut through the epoxy because then I got to reprime, right? So what I want to do is I want to put epoxy down and let that dry. And then if I come back with polyester, the polyester gives me a nice uniform finish to lay on top of that epoxy, and I can start blocking on that polyester. Well, the polyester is great because now if I'm blocking and I have a little bit of, I start cutting through in a dent area, now I'm cutting into the polyester and not cutting into my epoxy where I got to reprime. So if you cut the polyester to start with, when you find the spots you need to fix, then you can wipe those. You can put filler on top of polyester or under polyester, either way. I like the option of having the filler on top of the polyester because it actually gives you something, gives you a nice bed and gives you something that you can lay the glaze into that, that you can stand and not worry about cutting through. So the polyester is a great option for that. We're going to do that here in a minute. Anyway, so this is kind of the gamut, guys. I hope we didn't do this too fast. I did this because we want you guys to succeed. We don't want to see you guys do the same things I've done. I can tell you, promise that, I've had situations where I've primed something with the wrong product and it's peeled or it's came up or it's broken. So we don't want to see you guys have to go through that. And I know that looking at all these posts on social media that guys think, well, it's primer. Primer sticks to bare metal. Not so. Every primer has its own purpose. And every primer has its own things it can do and it can't do. So really understand the best thing you can do, honestly, whatever product you choose to use, is read the P sheet and understand, what this product is designed to go over. Also understand what the profile of sanding you're going to need to do, because that's going to play into the success or failure of your product. Because A, you have to have mechanical adhesion and you have to have chemical adhesion. So every primer is built and specified as to what grits that needs to be used. So you guys pay attention, read the directions. That's the best thing in the world. And make sure, listen, don't ever guess on catalyzing primer. I had guys that will go, hey, I pour about that much and that's about good. It's not Bondo, guys. Primer is a science, especially epoxies. If you get an epoxy off just a little bit in the mixing ratio, it will not be a very happy product. So make sure and measure your primers and your catalysts and all the things that go into them. And think about that epoxy option I threw at you, because you can use that, mix it up once a day. And that's a great option for any cut throughs you have, to get a little and put it on there so that you know that you're protecting yourself. Okay? So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this. We're not geniuses here, but we want to make sure that we share information and try to dispel myths that we see in the industry. And we love you guys, and thanks for following Collision Edge, at Collision Edge on Instagram, at Collision Edge on Facebook. You can check our website out at www.collisionedge.com. You might see the tape thing on there. We've actually got a registration link in our Instagram that you can get a sticker for free. We'll send you one, whether or not you bought a tape thing or not. If you haven't bought a tape thing, you should. If you haven't bought some of our estimating tools, you should check them out. But those are all on our website, www.collisionedge.com. So thanks so much for your time, guys, and we will be talking to you later on. Back at you.